Imagine this. You wake up one morning and nothing is wrong. The sun slices through the blinds with sterile precision. The coffee brews automatically, exactly the way you like it. The phone buzzes with friendly notifications. Your friends are fine, your job still exists, and the world has not yet ended. And yet something you can't quite name, feels off. Like a silent pressure in the room, a presence just outside the frame of vision. You breathe, but it's shallow. You move, but not forward. You exist, but not fully. You try to shake it off, dismiss it as tiredness, routine, stress. But what if it's none of those things? What if it's something worse? What if the problem isn't that something is wrong, but that everything is exactly as it's supposed to be? You see the schedule pinned to your fridge, the neatly ordered calendar that maps out your week. Wake, work, eat, scroll, sleep, repeat. Everyone tells you this is what life is. You're doing well, you're functioning, you're winning by every societal metric, and yet your soul whispers like a prisoner, tapping on the inside of a padded wall. This can't be all there is. You wonder, why does ambition feel hollow, success feel scripted, and even rebellion feel mass-produced? Why does every choice feel like one you've already been expected to make? Why do you feel like you're living someone else's story, with your own name scribbled on top like a correction? Here's the paradox. You are free, and yet you are not. You have choices, and yet none of them feel real. You can speak, move, post, vote, create, earn, and consume, but you can't feel it matter. You are alive, yet deeply anesthetized. What if I told you this isn't a glitch in your life? It's the design. Because long before you ever had the chance to say no, you were being trained to say yes. Not with whips or chains, but with praise, likes, grades, trends, and quiet nods of approval. You were taught to shrink in ways that look like maturity, to silence yourself in ways that sound like wisdom, to conform in ways that pass for success. And it worked so well you now police yourself, avoiding risks, hiding your instincts, fearing failure, needing permission. You don't need to be imprisoned, because you've been conditioned to lock the cell from the inside. How did that happen? How can a society so obsessed with individual freedom create people so starved of real power? How can a world bursting with opportunity leave you feeling so cornered? How can your life be full of motion but void of direction? Here's a truth that no one wants to say out loud. Powerlessness doesn't always look like chains. It often looks like comfort, like normalcy, like acceptance, like following the well-lit path. It's the calm smile at the dinner table while your spirit rots behind your eyes. It's the passive agreement in meetings, the silence when something inside screams to speak. It's the subtle art of slowly forgetting what you once dreamed of becoming. And you're not alone. Look around. How many people do you know who have settled? Who perform their roles flawlessly but no longer believe in the script? Who go through motions they no longer understand, in lives they no longer feel? Maybe without realizing it, you've learned to obey in ways that don't look like obedience. You've learned to fear in ways that wear the mask of wisdom. You've learned to give away your agency in transactions so subtle they felt like empowerment. This isn't about blaming others. This isn't about cynicism. This is about noticing. It's about seeing the invisible web that was spun around you before you could walk, think, or choose. A web woven by culture, media, tradition, school, family, even love. Because society doesn't train you with obvious cages. It trains you with dreams, with neatly packaged desires you're told to chase. with rules you internalize so deeply you forget they're not yours. It trains you to want what it needs you to want, to work how it needs you to work, to live a life that keeps the machine running, even if it slowly kills the part of you that was born wild. So the question isn't, are you free? The question is far more dangerous. Who taught you what freedom is? And if you looked deeper beneath the stories, the slogans, the smiles, what would you find at the root of this quiet global hypnosis? What lies beneath this invisible training? What ancient fears? What hidden philosophies? What seductive illusions? Let's go there. Let's dig into the hidden architecture of your reality, because only by seeing the trap can you begin to escape it. There is a peculiar kind of violence that doesn't draw blood. It doesn't scream or strike. It simply whispers into your ear every day from birth to death. Stay small, and most never realize they've heard it. To understand how society trains you to be powerless, you must first understand that it doesn't do so by accident. This is not the result of a broken system. This is the system working perfectly. But what system? Not just governments, not just corporations, not even capitalism alone. The true system is more intimate, more insidious. Its psychological architecture, a lifelong curriculum of obedience, distraction, and self-doubt. And like all powerful systems, it begins before you can speak, before you can resist. Consider this. A child is not born obedient. A child is chaos incarnate, curious, impulsive, loud, raw. The child asks 1,000 questions, not to pass a test, but to feel the world, to test the edges of reality, to know. And what does society do with this flame? It begins to tame it. At first, it looks innocent. The child is told to sit still, to raise their hand, to color within the lines. They're rewarded for being good, for listening, for sharing, for waiting their turn. But what is being lost in this process? What's being replaced? The instinct to follow one's own voice is being overwritten by the habit of listening for external approval. Psychologist Carl Jung once warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But this is precisely what society fears: individuals who are whole unto themselves. Why? Because a person who accepts themselves fully is not easily manipulated. They do not chase hollow success. They do not need to impress. They cannot be herded like livestock through institutions, algorithms, and cultural scripts. This is why the system works tirelessly to install an inner judge, that voice in your head that says, "Don't say that, don't wear that, don't want that, it's weird, it's risky, it's wrong." That voice wasn't yours originally. It was planted there. Jung called this process individuation gone wrong. The self split into fragments, with the true self buried beneath layers of false personas built to survive the crowd. In simple terms, you learn to be who the world needs you to be, not who you are. And this is not random. It is rooted in something even older than psychology: fear. Friedrich Nietzsche called it the herd instinct, the deeply ingrained survival mechanism that made us favor safety over authenticity. When we were tribes of hunter-gatherers, standing out could mean exile, and exile meant death. So we learned to hide our strange, to dim our flame, to echo the group's beliefs, even if they strangled our own. Fast forward thousands of years. The jungle is now concrete, the tribe is now Twitter. But the fear remains. If I am fully myself, I will not be accepted. If I am not accepted, I will not survive. Enter modern society, designed not around survival of the body, but the survival of the status quo. You are taught to internalize standards that benefit the machine: productivity, likability, obedience. And here's the catch. The more you conform, the more approval you get. But that approval is conditional. It is only given when you silence the very parts of you that would rebel against the lie. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." Society, he argued, demands a mask, and we wear it so long we forget it's not our face. By the time you become aware of this conditioning, it's not just around you, it's within you. Think about it. Have you ever had a bold idea only to talk yourself out of it, with a voice that sounded like reason but felt like fear? Have you ever wanted to say something true but chose silence to avoid discomfort? Have you ever sacrificed your joy for respectability? That's not coincidence. That's the system at work inside your psyche. But it goes deeper still. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, believed that society teaches us to flee from freedom itself. True freedom, he said, is terrifying because it comes with radical responsibility. If you're free, then everything is your choice. No excuses, no scapegoats. That weight is too much for most to carry. So instead, we choose roles. We hide behind careers, ideologies, routines, even identities. We trade the infinite burden of freedom for the comforting chains of expectation. Because power isn't just about action, it's about belief. If you believe your voice doesn't matter, you won't speak. If you believe your dream is foolish, you won't chase it. If you believe you are powerless, you will act like you are, even when you're not. And this belief is society's greatest weapon. Aldous Huxley envisioned a dystopia not of brutal tyranny, but of seductive comfort. In Brave New World, the citizens are happy, entertained, well-fed, and completely controlled. Huxley understood that the surest way to keep people from revolting is not to crush them, but to satisfy them just enough that they forget they are in chains. This is the invisible cage, a life where you are comfortable enough to stop questioning, but not awake enough to start living. It whispers, "You have everything you need, except the need to question why you feel so empty." It convinces you that your anxiety is a personal flaw, not a rational response to a world designed to alienate you from your own power. It tells you that your depression is a chemical imbalance, not the soul's rebellion against a life of quiet despair. It explains your numbness as adulthood, your fatigue as reality, your discontent as immaturity. But what if these are not pathologies, but clues? What if your restlessness is your soul's way of saying, there is more? What if your suffering isn't a malfunction, but a signal? A signal that you were never meant to be tamed. A signal that the life you've accepted was built to keep you small. A signal that powerlessness is not your nature, but your training. And if that's true, then maybe the pain you feel isn't a sign of failure, but the first flicker of awakening. The next question becomes inescapable. If the problem is this deep, this silent, this embedded, what is it doing to you every day you don't notice? What happens when you live your whole life asleep, believing you're awake? It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly realize you've surrendered your life. That would be too obvious, too easy to resist. No, this erosion is subtle, elegant, almost beautiful in its deceit. It starts with compromise. You silence your gut once, just once. Maybe in a meeting, maybe in a relationship, maybe at the dinner table. You choose safety, acceptance, the benefit of the doubt. It feels small, but something inside notices. Then it happens again and again. Each time the silence becomes easier, the voice within you becomes fainter, until one day you realize you can't even hear it anymore. That's the first consequence. Self-abandonment disguised as maturity. You've been taught that growing up means becoming realistic, that dreaming too big is naive, that changing the world is a fantasy reserved for others. You learn to trade wonder for wages, courage for credentials, curiosity for compliance, and everyone around you applauds. You fit in, you succeed, but no one tells you that the price of that applause is the slow suffocation of your true self. By the time most people hit adulthood, they are strangers to their own desires. They can list their job titles, their dietary restrictions, their Myers-Briggs types, their Spotify playlists, but ask them what makes them feel alive and watch them freeze, because they no longer remember, and if they do, they no longer believe it matters. This is the second consequence, the collapse of inner authority. When you are conditioned to obey, whether through schooling, social media, or the crushing uniformity of adult life, you gradually outsource your decision-making, not just to institutions but to the crowd. You start looking outward for what's right, instead of inward for what's true. You post not what you feel, but what will be liked. You speak not what you believe, but what will be accepted. You plan your future not based on who you are, but on what is expected. You become a reflection of reflections, a pixel in someone else's projection. Your life ceases to be authored by you. It becomes curated for approval, optimized for validation, sterilized for consumption. And yet, something doesn't sit right, because beneath the performance, a question lingers like a virus in the bloodstream. Whose life am I living? This dissonance breeds the third consequence, spiritual anesthesia. You begin to numb, not because you're weak, but because it's unbearable to feel the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. You seek distractions, constant stimulation, notifications, entertainment, substances, productivity, all cleverly disguised methods of self-escape. The body is moving, but the soul is on standby. Nietzsche called this state nihilism, a sense that life lacks inherent meaning, purpose, or value, but he warned that this void doesn't appear from nowhere. It emerges when the old gods die and are not replaced, when the values society instills no longer satisfy the deep hunger of the human soul. And today, we worship false gods, busyness, branding, relatability, influence. But none of them fill the void. They only disguise it, so people numb, they scroll, they consume, they buy and post and laugh and nod and clap and hustle and grind, and yet, late at night, when the world is quiet, a question claws its way to the surface. Why does none of this feel real? This leads to the fourth consequence, emotional alienation. You begin to lose the ability to access the full spectrum of your emotions. Joy feels muted. Grief feels pointless. Rage feels dangerous. Love feels conditional. Vulnerability feels like exposure. You become a dulled version of yourself, not because you lack emotion, but because you've been taught to suppress it for the sake of functionality. You've been taught that feelings are a liability, that tears are weakness, that rage is impolite, that passion is too much, that yearning is impractical. So what happens? You become fine, just fine, all the time. And being fine is the slow death of the human spirit. But the damage doesn't stop with you. This leads us to the most haunting consequence of all. A society built on quiet despair. Walk through any city and you'll see it. Smiles that don't reach the eyes. laughter that's too loud, success that feels hollow, entire crowds of people who are alive but not awake, who speak of purpose but live in survival mode, who crave authenticity but trade in performance, who ache for connection but fear being seen. This isn't a personal failure. This is mass conditioning. A culture that rewards obedience breeds a population terrified of truth. And here's the irony. The more this fear spreads, the more we feel alone. The more we feel alone, the more we self-isolate. The more we self-isolate, the more power we give to the system that made us feel powerless to begin with. It is a self-replicating virus, and it's not random. It's embedded in every layer of the modern world, in our schooling systems, where memorization is praised and imagination is quietly punished, in our workplaces where efficiency trumps creativity and authority is rarely questioned, in our social media where dissent is punished and algorithms feed you more of what keeps you numb, in our advertising which thrives on dissatisfaction, because if you felt truly whole, what would there be left to sell? But perhaps the most dangerous consequence is this. Eventually, you stop believing there's anything to escape from. The cage becomes invisible. It becomes familiar. And when something becomes familiar, it becomes normal. And when it becomes normal, it becomes real, even if it's not. This is the final trick of powerlessness. It makes you believe that power is something you never had, that it was always for others, that it was never yours to begin with. But what if it was? What if it still is? What if the pain, the numbness, the restlessness, the insomnia, the anxiety, the longing, all of it, isn't proof that something's wrong with you, but proof that something in you still knows, still remembers, still aches to be free? So the next question emerges, not from fear, but from the faint glow of something ancient and indestructible rising in your chest. What if this isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of your rebellion? What if your suffering is not a flaw to be fixed, but a compass pointing you toward freedom? What if the aching, the restlessness, the quiet suspicion that you were meant for more, that you were built for something wilder, truer, deeper, wasn't your weakness, but your last fragment of truth? Then you must understand this. The rebellion doesn't begin with violence. It begins with remembrance. You were not born powerless. You were taught to forget your strength. And now you must remember, not in theory, not in some grand, abstract philosophy, but in the marrow of your bones, in the way you breathe, in the way you walk into rooms, in the way you no longer apologize for existing. But how? How do you begin to reclaim power in a world that has taught you to fear your own voice? You begin with the one act that breaks the entire illusion. You question everything, every belief, every label, every story you've inherited about what it means to be good, successful, normal, worthy, beautiful, intelligent. You hold each idea up to the light and ask, whose voice is this? Whose approval does this serve? Does this make me more alive or more obedient? You must become dangerous again, not in the way that harms others, but in the way that refuses to be tamed. Because the system survives through your silence, your self-policing, your desire to belong more than your desire to be free. But the moment you stop editing yourself to be digestible, something breaks, and in that fracture, light gets in. You begin to say things you were taught not to say. You begin to want things you were told not to want. You begin to listen, not to the crowd, but to the subtle pulse beneath your skin that whispers, This is who I am. And that's when the world starts to push back. Because make no mistake, the system will resist your awakening, not with guns or chains, but with subtler weapons, shame, guilt, ridicule, the withering fear of being alone. It will tell you, you've changed. It will say, you've become selfish. It will whisper, who do you think you are? But now you understand, this is not failure. This is proof that the rebellion has begun, and you are not alone. Throughout history, those who broke free were not the most talented or the most liked. They were the most aware. They saw the lie, and once seen, the lie can never be unseen. Søren Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, not physical death, but the despair of a self that refuses to become itself. He believed the only way out was through an inward leap, into authenticity, into risk, into radical subjectivity. So what does this look like now in your life? It starts small. You stop laughing at jokes that make your soul wince. You stop saying yes when your gut screams no. You stop chasing goals that were planted in you by people who never knew your heart. You reclaim your no. You rediscover your yes. You remember that saying I don't know is not weakness, it's the beginning of truth. You stop performing. You start revealing. You walk into rooms without shrinking your light to make others comfortable. You let your emotions come, fierce, unfiltered, alive, because they are not liabilities, they are intelligence. You stop numbing. You start noticing, and in this noticing, a new kind of power emerges. It's not loud, it's not performative, it doesn't need a stage. It's the quiet strength of a person who no longer betrays themselves for the illusion of acceptance. This is where it turns. This is where the rebellion becomes joy. Because here's the secret, freedom doesn't mean escaping society. It means no longer needing it to validate your existence. It means building a life where your worth is not up for debate. It means finding your center in a world designed to keep you spinning. It means choosing truth even when it costs you everything that's false. And yes, there will be losses. You will lose friendships built on mutual compliance. You will lose roles that made you feel important but empty. You will lose the ability to tolerate conversations that revolve around nothing. You may lose the life you thought you wanted, but what you gain is everything else. Clarity, peace, a spine. You begin to attract people who see you, not your mask, not your role, but you. You begin to create not out of strategy, but out of soul. You begin to feel deeply, unapologetically, as if every emotion is sacred. You begin to walk as if your life matters, because now it does. Not because anyone else says so, but because you say so. And this is the most radical act of all, to stop asking for permission, to wake up every day and declare with your breath, with your choices, with your presence, I belong to no one's system but my own. This is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. This is rebellion for the sake of truth, of wholeness, of becoming the person you were before the world told you who to be. Because the final twist is this: the power they trained you to forget is still in you. It was never destroyed, only buried. And now you are unearthing it, one truth at a time, one no at a time, one unedited breath at a time, until one day, without warning, you realize you no longer fit in the cage, and you never will again. Let's say you make it. You tear off the mask. You burn the script. You walk away from the version of yourself that was crafted in the image of expectations. And for a while, there is only silence, no applause, no roadmap, just the echo of your own breath and the unfamiliar weight of your own freedom. You stand in front of the mirror and see something terrifying. No more lies, no more roles, just you. And in that raw stillness, the most powerful truth begins to reveal itself. Not through a shout, but through a whisper you've been running from your whole life. You were never powerless. That was the illusion, the great con, the seduction of helplessness, the lie that your voice didn't matter, that your feelings were invalid, that your dreams were delusions, that truth was dangerous, and that safety came from compliance. But safety was the trap. You see it now, don't you? They didn't need to imprison you with walls. They did it with ideas. They made freedom seem like recklessness. They made joy seem like vanity. They made dissent seem like danger. They made being fully you feel like a crime. But here's the final paradox. The moment you reclaim your power, you stop needing it. Because true power, the kind that cannot be taken or given, doesn't look like dominance. It doesn't need control. It doesn't scream or conquer or convince. It simply is. It is the quiet, unwavering presence of a person who knows who they are. It is the authority of being aligned with your soul, not your ego. It is the unshakable peace of someone who no longer trades truth for belonging. You don't need the world to approve of you anymore. You are the approval. You are the original source of meaning. You are the creator of value. You are not a product of the system. You are the glitch in it, the signal, the storm. And now, finally, you realize this was never about escape. It was about return. Return to the self before the programming. Return to the knowing that lived in your chest as a child. Return to the fire in your gut that whispered, "There's more than this." You were not born to be a cog in a machine. You were born to be a mirror to the divine. And the systems that tried to shrink you, political, economic, educational, religious, were never scared of your weakness. They were terrified of your strength, because a person who owns themselves cannot be bought. A person who thinks critically cannot be controlled. A person who feels deeply cannot be dehumanized. A person who walks in truth becomes a threat to every lie. That's why they trained it out of you. But the training never fully took. Not really. It left cracks. It left questions. It left a hunger too persistent to ignore. And now, here you are, standing at the edge of a world that no longer makes sense to you. But that's not a crisis. That's the invitation to create something entirely new, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You don't need to destroy the world to be free. You need only to stop betraying yourself within it. And from that choice, something extraordinary begins. You stop reacting. You start creating, not in rebellion, but in reverence. Not to prove anything, but because it's who you are. You begin to build your own rhythm, your own language, your own definition of wealth, success, love, purpose. You begin to live in such a way that your very being becomes a revolution, and others will notice, not because you preach, but because you radiate, not because you command, but because you embody. You become a walking permission slip for others to wake up. And this is how the world begins to change, not from the top down, but from the inside out. One human at a time saying, "I will not betray myself to be accepted." One soul at a time remembering, "I was never meant to be small." One voice at a time rising, "I am here, I am real, and I choose to live awake." This is the final, most powerful realization. The system was never stronger than you. It only survived by keeping you asleep, and now you are awake, So don't just survive this life. Don't just play the role. Don't just follow the script. Write your own. Let it be strange. Let it be wild. Let it make no sense to anyone but you, because that's what power really is. The refusal to be anything less than fully alive. You are not put here to be efficient, or manageable, or likable. You were put here to become, to unravel and rewrite and rewild, to resurrect the part of you that once believed in magic, in meaning, in the possibility that life was meant to be more than silent suffering. You were born to shatter illusions, to live so freely that others remember what freedom feels like. So go, burn the mask, break the script, speak the truth you were taught to fear, and when the world tells you to shrink, expand. When they tell you to sit down, stand taller. When they demand your silence, sing, because now you remember you were never powerless. You were only persuaded to forget, and now you will never forget again.